Good afternoon, good morning, everyone. Thank you for joining this session. Just seeing all the numbers tick up at the moment, so we'll just give a couple of moments to let everyone filter through from the waiting room. For anyone just joining, we're just letting everyone filter through from the waiting room. The numbers are still ticking up quite rapidly at the moment, so we'll just give it another minute or so, and then we'll hop into the session. Right, numbers still going. We'll let it tick over to 2 minutes past, and then I think we'll jump on because the session is being recorded as well. Right, great. Thank you everyone for joining this session today. Just a quick bit of housekeeping. This is recorded, so can be watched on demand later for any of your colleagues or friends that can't make it today. There will also be this session repeated. The recording will be repeated specifically next week on the 18th at, I believe, 3 p.m. UK time, 10 a.m. Eastern, for anyone that wants to join at that specific time. Today, this is the second episode in the Recruit Smarter series, where we're focusing on the top metrics that every agency should track and how to improve them as well. For anyone that doesn't know me, I'm Joe Maguire. I'm the Director of Strategy for Analytics and Insights at Bullhorn, joined by my very close colleague and friend, Joe Buckley. We both joined Bullhorn coming up for 3 years ago via the Cube19 acquisition. I think Joe, I love working with Joe because he's so uniquely placed in his role. He's the customer analytics manager, but he's worked as a recruiter prior to his role at Cube19. He also worked as an analyst within staffing businesses. So he's really uniquely positioned to really understand the job that the recruitment industry is trying to do, but can apply his data brain to it as well. So we're always chatting about new ways and insights and ideas that we can share with the wider industry and our customer base. So we're excited to talk you through this session today. Just to set the scene, we talk to a lot of our customers in the industry all the time, and we're seeing some key themes, consistent themes that are shining through at the moment. I think the fact that everyone's looking to win new business isn't necessarily a new theme, but I think the way companies are going about doing this right now is actually different than we've seen before. I think during any downturn in the market, companies always look to gain efficiencies across the board. But I think this time around, when we're talking to companies, most genuinely seem to stand behind the fact that, yes, they're going to grow headcount again in the future, but now is the time of driving efficiency and helping increase performance on a per head basis, really starting to up level everyone in the company and start to do more with less, which means that everyone is looking for better insight into their business, to understand where the opportunity is perhaps being missed, and how they can capitalize on that opportunity to increase that individual performance. And of course, we've got this really exciting time of AI at the moment, where there's a lot of our customers that are really starting to dip their toe into AI and see some really good gains from it right now. But everyone else is really looking at how they can start to prepare their data and improve data quality, data visibility, and ultimately the value they get from their data, which is going to help gear them up more to capitalize on AI as that starts to evolve and expand in the coming months and quarters. But it's been tough, and it is still tough in a bunch of regions and areas and verticals. And I'm not going to dwell too much on this because, but I do want to sort of highlight the fact that we have been through a tough time. I think the fact that some regions have come through or are coming through some of these challenges, we're starting to see some green shoots around, and there's more positivity starting to come into the market. And I think it means that people are now looking at the future of how we start to scale again at the right time. And that's really what we want to focus on today, is sharing some ideas as we go through. But because of the challenges we've been experiencing, we're actually in quite a unique time in the industry. Typically speaking, when markets are strong, we have high job availability, we have lower candidate availability. And then when markets decline, we tend to see the opposite. But because we came from such a talent short time before this recent downturn, and the fact that with this downturn, we haven't seen mass layoffs like we have in previous times during COVID and 08 financial crisis. So the talent shortage is still at play here. We've got both a job and candidate, low job and candidate availability. So as we're thinking about this, we're really sort of thinking about and making sure that every opportunity counts. We've got to capitalize on every opportunity that exists out there, particularly while times are tough. And we at Bullhorn have been working with our customers for many years now through the digital, helping customers through the digital transformation journey. First of all, digitizing the platform, automating processes where possible, really building out this self-serve talent experience to help build and expand and nurture talent pools. But we are now in this time of data differentiation, where every company has a unique data set, and they can really use that to their advantage to really capitalize on the opportunities that are in front of them within their business. Companies are starting to now use this data really well to drive strategic decision making, to deliver insights and actionable insights across the business, so everyone knows the most valuable tasks to be working on all the time, to ultimately help increase client penetration, increase candidate placement rate, and all the while unlocking greater quality data to unlock the power of AI. So I think this is a really exciting time we're in now. And we're going to sort of focus in on a bit of why it's exciting. But before I do that, I do want to sort of highlight that when we talk about metrics, key metrics, I do think that the industry in a reasonable big chunk still is using data in a fairly immature way. We use the term data because data is effectively a count of how many things have happened, right? So it's collecting data. But data is not equal to insight. Data is the input. Insight is more of the stuff that helps us identify opportunity. And when we think about insight, we also know that data is certainly not equal to actionable insight. Now, some of the themes we're going to talk about today, hopefully, make a lot of sense, and they're not necessarily new themes and ideas, but we think they're important to talk about today. There might be some of the metrics or data points that we refer to that are going to be new to some or most of this audience. And if that's the case, we hope that it makes sense what we're going to say. So we're going to go a couple of layers deeper. We're not talking about number of calls, number of jobs added, number of interviews. We're going to go to that next layer down and talk about where we really see metrics that move the needle in terms of individual performance and increasing per head. But I want to start with this because if this does get a bit complex in some areas, I want everyone to be trying to think about this next visual that's coming up, because this is ultimately how simple the data points can and should be in your mindset. Effectively, the fundamentals of recruitment and staffing, we need three things. We need clients, we need jobs from those clients, and we need candidates to fill those jobs with. If we really oversimplify the staffing industry, that's it. Your teams, whether you work a split desk model or a 360 model, your teams, your team members are interacting at all of these points and have the ability to very much impact and influence the success of all of these areas. So volume plays a part in this, but actually the bits that Joe's going to start to highlight in a moment are really, like I say, is what moves the needle. And the more the teams have the right data and guidance and inputs, the more placements we can make within here. There's a lot of opportunity or missed opportunity that happens in this industry. And mine and Joe's goal is to cancel that out and help our customers go and achieve more of it. So where do we start? When we're talking about the key metrics in a business, well, I think to understand what are the key drivers, the key inputs, we need to start at the end and work backwards. Now, I think when I think about any business, the idea of any business is to be, or typically, is to be as profitable as possible, which means that in a staffing business, all of the fee earners that come in need to ideally make as much profit per head as they absolutely can. So the first point is to really understand what is the cost base, what is the profitability line for each individual. And This will vary. The logic behind this is going to vary by business. I see some companies looking at it in quite a simplistic way or quite a high level way of how much is this individual costing me from a basic salary perspective and what are the direct costs associated to that person. Other companies at the other end of the spectrum may take a broader view and say, what is the entire cost of the business, the business outlay, and let's divide that by every single fee earner in the business. And you'll actually get quite varying numbers of what is the break-even point per head. But whatever your formula is, I think this is really the starting point to identify what the individual's financial target is going to be. Now, there's, of course, considerations that go into this in terms of someone's experience, their tenure, their ramp period. There's a lot of factors in here. And not being profitable at the start is absolutely fine, as long as you know what your journey to profitability is, and you can measure that people are on track to achieve it, and you can help them achieve it faster. But so ultimately, when we come into that, GM per head, right? Gross profit per head, it's the number one metric. How much money is someone generating for the business in their job role? Now, that's great. That's a measure I think that most, if not all, companies that I talk to have, and it's probably what has the most emphasis, and rightly so. So what we're going to talk about today is how do we impact that number? How do we make that number? How do we get people there faster? How do we get them there more consistently? How do we get them there with hopefully this, like get them overachieving on that number with the same or less effort, which means there's more room in the tank to go after more. So think about that Venn diagram I flashed up a moment ago. Clients, jobs, candidates. We're continuing that same theme throughout here. So Joe's going to take over in a moment and start to talk about each of these in a bit more detail. But client LTV, client lifetime value, job fill rate, and candidate return on effort is related to that Venn diagram. And I'll hand over to Joe now to dig in a bit more.
Thank you very much, Joe. So, as Joe said, we believe that the key as a recruiter to maximizing that GM per head you generate is by optimizing the three main fundamentals of the recruitment process: clients who you place with, the jobs that you're filling, and the candidates that you're filling them with. So how do we quantify these fundamentals? Some top-level measures we could put forward for these are client lifetime value. How much are clients paying you throughout the course of your relationship with them? Job fill rate. What proportion of jobs are you taking on that you eventually go on to fill? And candidate return on effort. For each precious candidate, how are you maximizing the possible revenue to be generated for the effort that you're putting in? Now, as an analyst, I see a huge amount of complexity and sometimes inefficiency in many of these metrics, but each area of inefficiency is an opportunity to make small changes which can lead to large improvements. This can be achieved by going past the counting of the data to the discovery of insight, but more importantly, to making that insight actionable at the desk level so that recruiters know where to focus and how to improve these top metrics directly. In this next section, I'm going to break down these three component metrics and demonstrate how much complexity there truly is below each, with some supporting data and some ideas for improvement. And we'll start off with clients. And the first metric I'll talk about is client retention, which we measure as the proportion of clients who you place with in a given year who you're still placing with the following year. Based on that, I'll start you off with a shocking stat. 60% of recruiter client relationships turn over every single year. Now, this is an average and is driven predominantly by transactional relationships with single placements. But considering how much harder it is to open a new client than pick up and fill a job with an existing one, why aren't more of these relationships maintained and, even better, expanded? We'll see later on just how much there is to be gained from working more vacancies from existing clients. But the best way to improve this is simply by staying in touch. Regular check-ins, live job follow-ups, and even sharing top candidates are a great way to keep top of mind with your existing clients. The tougher part is tracking who to call and when. Here's where lists of previous clients, automations, or historic placement metrics can all be utilized in conjunction with each other to remind recruiters who to keep in contact with and even facilitate some of that contact. Next up, client return on effort. Now, this can vary by what your key input metric is, but for this, we rank every client in a time frame by their submission to placement ratio. Essentially, how many units of input or effort are going in for every unit of success or output. But you could do it with jobs, you could do it with interviews, but for today, we're just going to discuss it in the context of submissions. And when we actually do this analysis, we see that on average, low effort or high return clients, the ones we want to focus on, are responsible for 75% of placements from just 40% of overall submission effort. That means the remaining 25% of placements come from the other 60% of effort. You might be familiar with the Pareto principle, the 80-20 rule, and this is essentially recruitment's version of that. And knowing this step may beg the question, is every relationship equally worth the effort to expand or retain? It's easy to spot a tough transactional relationship, which required lots of effort to win a single deal. But are you doing this analysis for your top 10 biggest customers? Chances are one or two of those will require volumes of effort far detached from their peers, effort which could be better diverted to these lower effort clients. Alternatively, that stat could just prompt a great conversation with the customer on how to mutually improve this ratio, be it in qualification and delivery at the job pool stage, or better commitment and timelines from the client. At the very least, a deeper understanding of how your customers differ can help you prioritize your pipeline and strategize customer development. Now, the final client focus metric we have is client penetration. And there are a few different ways to measure this, but ultimately the question is, how many of your relationships are as expansive as they could be? How many have multiple placements across multiple recruiters with multiple contact relationships across as many departments as possible? We generally find that only a third of recruiter-client relationships have more than one placement across multiple recruiters, which is what we would consider a good start for a developing client relationship. Now, there are perhaps three main metrics to this, elements to this metric, all the multiples: the number of placements made, which can always go up, the number of recruiters you've got engaged with the customer, and the number of contacts or departments that are engaged on the client side. Cross-selling is obviously a fantastic way to develop fruitful relationships, especially with your higher return clients, and may open up opportunities for several teams or permanent and contract recruiters to generate revenue. Even better, building a network of relationships between multiple recruiters and multiple client contacts goes a long way to reducing the risk of losing relationships when staff turnover, be they your own recruiters or the points of contact with the customer. Of course, a great way to improve this metric is by incentivizing cross-selling, but the challenge really lies in identifying where the opportunities are. There are probably a good number of them already in your database, and I'll tell you how to find them. Take a look at the customers you've already made placements with. Of those, who have had unfilled jobs with other teams, other contacts, other recruiters? These are all points where their opportunity was already there at some point. How can that be realized next time?
Yeah, and these stats, as much as I suppose we are talking about them in a bit of a linear way, just to make it very clear and structured, data is not linear, particularly in this industry. There are so many companies that are still measuring volume of activity, effectively backwards looking. How many things has someone already done? Whether that be calls, jobs added, submissions, interviews, offers, placements, redeployment, whatever it might be. Volume is the sort of the input piece of it. But when you look at data in that way, it's linear. But recruitment, all candidates, jobs, repeat business, like these things that Joe's talking about now and will continue to talk about, they're all intrinsically linked to each other. So when we think about how just the client LTV piece links together, well, going and winning repeat business is really important. Like we look at churn in a software business or a SaaS business, it's like the number one or very high up on the metric list for most companies outside of recruitment. But how does that work then? So we want to retain more clients. If we're cross-selling to those clients, by nature, we'll probably retain more. We've got less single points of failure. But if we're also looking at the amount of effort we're putting in with certain clients, if you can leverage the data to inform conversations with those clients and improve the efficiency with the bad clients, you free up more time to be not churning other clients out there. Or maybe it becomes a bit liberating and you do fire the odd client because they're not prepared to flex and become more efficient for you. So taking that time and investing it in the companies that otherwise would have churned, that are much more efficient, to make more from the same effort. So even just the client LTV metrics are all intrinsically linked. And you'll see as we go through job and candidate as well, they become more linked as well. We end up with this spider web of data and opportunity.
Thank you, Joe. So moving on to the jobs that the clients actually give you. Job fill rate is a key metric that almost all of the customers I speak to use to quantify their overall recruitment operation. Now, there are many different aspects to filling a job and many ways to gain an edge and improve this metric overall. starting with the repeat business pipeline. Now, admittedly, this one does tread the line between clients and jobs. And the way I measure it is as the proportion of jobs in the pipeline or that you've added where the client was a previous customer, one you've already placed with, compared to new with no prior placements. The reason it's a job metric, though, is because job fill rate is actually 38% higher for jobs with clients you've previously placed with versus prospects with no prior placements. So not only is it generally widely accepted to be harder to open new business pipeline, it's actually harder to close it too. This should deeply emphasize the value of your previous client pool and demonstrate why retention is so key. Built relationships, signed terms, and mutual trust significantly increase the odds of success. And it's likely that in many cases, the existing job pipeline could be prioritized over the new. Of course, I'm not advocating that 100% of your jobs in the pipeline should be from existing clients. Today's prospects are tomorrow's repeat business, but a healthy stream of high fill rate jobs is a great way to keep the core business effective. Let's take a look at another way to do that, and that's in the quality job pipeline. Now, if perhaps you categorize your jobs, maybe A to D, for example, then you may look to measure this as the proportion of jobs added graded as A. But even if you don't do that grading, it's ultimately the proportion of jobs you're bringing on board, which are well qualified, will interview, and are likely to place. Remember, most of these metrics can be sliced by offices, teams, individual recruiters, or clients, and the importance of that will be emphasized here. Let's theorize a white collar recruitment process using a typical submission, interview, offer, placement workflow. Did you know that on average, for every 10 jobs added of this type, 2 don't even get submissions? Of the 8 that do, half of those don't get interviewed. That means that only 40% of jobs have any chance of being placed, and actually your fill rate is capped in many cases at this number before anything that even follows. Now, the components of this metric really are first the number of vacancies added the recruiter will actually work, and the proportion of those worked which are likely to get an interview. Now, obviously, the aim of the game here is to maximize the number of jobs added which recruiters are willing and able to submit candidates to. But that doesn't mean that bad jobs shouldn't be added to the system. In fact, they should be added, they should be qualified as a D and filtered out of your job metrics. Where this is of interest to you is when you analyze your clients, your teams, your recruiters, and look for any of those where the D population is higher than it should be. This lets you take action, whether it's getting a certain team focused on job quality or just firing a client with 10 D jobs and no deals. The other part of the metric is half of jobs with submissions get interviews. And in some cases, this can be down to the quality of the delivery, but how many more of these are due to poor commitment and qualification at the job pool stage? Challenging client commitment and honestly judging quality are a great way to maximize that A job pipeline and significantly improve the overall job fill rate. Remember that whilst we are talking about a proportion of the pipeline, the time that's saved by cutting out unworkable D jobs should be then replaced with time spent on picking up and working A jobs to actually create more placements. You can't just cut the 10 down to 4 and call it a day. It's worth noting that whilst we're talking about a professional recruitment workflow here, vacancy quality and client commitment transcend the specific recruitment industry you're working in. Find the metrics for you that can track wasted effort and low quality vacancies. Compare them across different units and clients to see where your attention is most needed. And last but not least, jobs with multiple interviews, or JMI, is one of the most effective ways to significantly improve job fill rate. And it's measured quite simply as the proportion of interviewing jobs with multiple candidates in the process. Did you know that jobs which get 3 candidates to interview have a 51% higher chance of being filled than jobs with just 1 candidate? Despite that, nearly half of interviewing jobs get just a single candidate interviewing. Now, there are many reasons why getting as many interviews as possible on a job helps, from increasing the variety of choice that the clients have access to maximizing your own market share against competing agencies or direct candidates. Moreover, the previous stat showed us that an interviewing job is generally in the minority. So when one's on board, every opportunity is precious and should be made the most of. I think this is relatively easy to increase. In fact, the data shows us that it's easier to get more interviews on an already interviewing job than convert a non-interviewing job to an interviewing one. Of course, specialist recruiters will have the advantage, but the headline is to stay with a vacancy until it's sufficiently worked and sufficiently interviewed.
Yeah, like my comment before, right? These things are all so linked together. By working with the right customers on the right types of jobs and getting the right coverage on them, you increase the return on effort that's being made across the board. And that term return on effort is something you'll hear us use a lot, not just for candidates we're coming on to next, but there's so much effort in this industry that's put in every single day by most of the people that work in it. How do you help all of your teams capitalize on that effort they're putting in?
Thanks, Joe. So finally, we come on to candidates and candidate return on effort. Now, whether the market's more candidate driven, more client driven, both, neither, the reason this industry exists is because good talent is hard to find. And if you're the one to go out and find those candidates, you should optimize the odds that you place them and maximize any GP thereafter. So I'll start with a huge metric, candidate placement rate, which encompasses a lot of smaller ratios, but simply put, how many of the candidates that you're submitting to vacancies are actually advancing to a placement or a start date? Did you know that on average, just 1 in 7 submitted candidates get placed by their agency? And that's a huge amount of dropout from a placement pipeline, especially one in which most don't even get invited to that first stage interview. I recommend you think about each progression point in a recruitment process as something which can be analysed, addressed, and improved. For example, in that white collar workflow we talked about, submissions become interviews, interviews finals, finals offers, offers placements, and placement starters. That's 5 different points that a candidate is actually able to leave that process. Of course, that's not always in their control, nor is it always in yours. However, there can be opportunities to drive small improvements in each, from initial job qualification to interview preparation and debrief to closing the candidate on the opportunity. You don't even need to affect change on this at a company level. You can find pockets of weak conversions within teams or individuals which can be corrected with further training. And with such small areas of improvement, if each of these 5 processes saw, say, just a 5% improvement, the compound effect through the pipeline would result in a 28% increase in the number of submissions proceeding to a start date. That's a huge amount of improvement in candidate return on effort from essentially the same amount of client submission input. And it's not unachievable through a small chain of incremental gains. Sorry, a chain of small incremental gains. Next up, candidates with multiple interviews. In the same way that every interviewing job is precious, so is every interviewing candidate. And this metric that we know as CMI is quite similar to JMI in that it's measured as the proportion of interviewing candidates who have multiple job interviews booked. Now, candidates interviewing for 3 jobs have a 66% higher chance of being placed by you than candidates interviewing with just 1. Despite that, less than 1 in 10 interviewing candidates have multiple job interviews booked through their agency. Now, there's a huge opportunity here that's clearly significantly underexplored. Again, specialist recruiters will have the advantage, but maximizing every precious candidate by providing them with multiple choices makes for a much easier close and more likely a placement. Of course, the first port of call to actually improve the metric is by examining any or all opportunities to introduce them into the existing job pipeline. But where those opportunities run out, use the candidate to create the opportunities. You've built their trust already. Perhaps there are silver medalists who weren't quite selected for the last vacancy you filled, but you know they're committed to making a move. Do everything in your power to create and maximize the opportunities in front of these precious candidates, coupled with JMI, and the rewards are likely to follow. Finally, contractor retention. So we're talking about candidate return on effort here, and that's not just about placement probability. Once a temp or a contractor is on your books, the best and by far the easiest way to retain the revenue they represent is by extending or redeploying them. Did you know that submission to placement rate is 76% higher for candidates who you've placed before compared to someone you haven't? Despite that, 70% of candidates finishing their contract or temp roles are not submitted by their recruiter for something new near their end date. There's no new sourcing needed, less administrative overhead, and you even have the candidate's last reference if you're looking to redeploy them. Retaining a temp candidate is the easiest way to generate continued revenue and maximize the return on the effort you've made to engage and actually get them placed. The way to improve this is first having a robust process to find out the possibility for extension, especially in the rare scenarios where you might be able to impact that as their recruiter. But then actually creating redeployment opportunities by engaging the candidate well before their end date, submitting them for jobs, ideally those with multiple interviews lined up, and continuing to do this for every end date for every contractor or finishing temp on the roster. This sounds like it could be hard to track, but it can be made so much easier by automating some of the contact and facilitating regular updates by providing recruiters with interactive lists of their finishing placements. So there you have it. One metric becomes 3, becomes 9. And once you start analyzing, you'll see how much further it's even possible to go. I'll let Joe talk about what you need to do next. My main piece of advice, if you dive into these metrics today or beyond, is to go further than the company level. Analyze by client, analyze by a department or even the individual. The quickest way to strike gold and specific action points is by going beyond the group level. It's easier to improve an area of weakness than it is to tackle all of the data at once. Thanks.
So you may be wondering why there's a big blank space on the right-hand side of this screen, and that's purposefully done. We're talking today about the top metrics, the things that we have seen evidence in the data, and we've seen customers that have really capitalized on these types of metrics and insights. But that's not the end point. I mentioned at the start, we have to start at the end and work backwards. So there's many things, as Joe's sort of described here, that feed into these metrics, and you go all the way across until you get to the inputs, the volume, how many things did someone do? That ultimately translates across to this and to GP per head, GM per head. But to the earlier point, data is not equal to insight. It's not equal to actionable insight. And I just want to describe a little bit more about what I'm referring to there, because I've talked about these data points and inputs a few times now. But data is the thing. So this is old school recruitment. This is traditional KPIs, volume-based KPIs. Do more things like make more phone calls, add more jobs, submit more candidates, get more interviews. But the times of just doing more have gone. I think, work-life balance comes into it. People can only work a certain amount. You can't just tell them to do double the effort, because a lot of people are working so hard in this industry. So data is the input. Data is the thing that helps us derive insight. Insight is all of the stats and metrics that Joe's just gone into detail about. And you can see from the stats that he's presented that there's so much missed opportunity still in this industry. We're in a time of low job and candidate availability. Capitalize on the ones that you have the opportunity to go and make money from. That's the advice here. But anyway, we move from data to insight. Insight being the thing that shows us our benchmark. Where are we right now? And then we have to track how that's progressing over time. We want it to tick up. We want it to get better. So that means you need to drive the right behaviors in the business. Actionable insights are exactly that. Simplifying this, like most of your team, like people on the front line, don't necessarily need to know all the statistics we've just spoken about here. Management leadership should be looking at that and caring about that. What the people on the front line should do is to have as much of their time freed up to doing what they do really, really well. And that's building and developing relationships with clients and candidates. Back to that Venn I spoke about at the start. That's what we want to do more of. And these actionable insights should be guiding your team and team members on what to do and when to do it with who, and let them use their skills, let them use their ability to build those relationships, whether that be through developing those relationships they've just forgotten to call, or making sure they get the right coverage on jobs. And to Joe's point earlier, we're talking about interviews from a white collar perspective here. If you're in blue collar, light industrial, there's other metrics that will be relevant to swap out. So it might be submissions. It might not be submissions. It might be people sent to a facility, for instance. There's other metrics within your business, your individualized core data set that you can identify as the key drivers for these successes. So they're a bit interchangeable. Or whether it's this prompt, if we're not submitting, we're not extending or submitting contract or temp finishers anywhere, we're not going to retain them. It's impossible. Competition will be capitalizing on it. So again, it's all about making sure that once you start to see the rewards of your effort, and you've won new business, you've won clients, you've found candidates and built a relationship and got them onboarded and compliant, you retain as much of that as possible. Of course, while still feeding in the top of funnel. You still need to be developing new candidates and new clients the whole way through. But in this time, I think we can do a much better job of capitalizing on the opportunity that is already in front of us. So we've talked about a lot of metrics. We've talked about some metrics that actually are reasonably complex to go and develop and create and certainly make real time. But this all relates back to these three things: clients, jobs, candidates. Having your team members fundamentally leveraging and improving return on effort at all areas of this Venn is fundamental for that success. And it converts to this effectively. What are the actionable insights delivered with the inputs, to get to the point where actually the insights are on an upward trajectory and you can measure and track that in real time. So the foundations for success, I really, really stand behind what I'm about to say, is that everyone on this call is digitized, right? That's great. Everyone's got their platforms in place. But having these insights delivered in real time, having actionable insights delivered in real time, so everyone in the business knows what to do, when to do it, it's visible if it hasn't been done, so the right coaching and mentoring and training can be given, so everyone understands why it's important, how to do it to the best of their ability. And automating. Automating is fundamental, but actually I think when we talk about automation, we talk about it a lot in automating processes behind the scenes, and that is really, really fundamental here. But automating the analytics, automating the data is a big part of that as well. So thinking about it as your foundation, the way to really gear up and set yourself for the best opportunity to capitalize on the AI wave that's coming is to be making sure that you have the right data in front of people and you have the right automations happening in the background to really drive this sort of hyperactivity within the company in the right places. So we've come up to the end. I didn't actually say this at the start, I apologize. If you do have any questions, please feel free to drop them in the chat and we'll try and cover as many as possible. My bad for not saying that earlier. But the takeaways we hope you leave with today are that measuring impact metrics, not just input metrics, is really fundamental here. The input, without input, we don't have anything else. So recording that data is very important, but switching from a mindset of volume to a mindset of like quality is really important here. Driving that behavioral change in the business to make sure that all of the humans in the company know what to do and when to do it, and so much more of their time will be freed up to have the right conversations with the right people. If your clients aren't right and they're not prepared to adapt to your way of working, perhaps they're not the right clients. Invest it at the time where they are the right ones. And automating the insights and processes across the business. That's, again, a fundamental part of this. Anytime there's a manual process, whether it's someone just recording lots of information that an automation platform could do for them, that's a time waste. If it's building manual reports, semi-manual reports, and distributing them at weekly or monthly intervals, opportunity is going to be missed because it's always backwards looking data. If we had done something differently last week, we may have been more successful yesterday, rather than taking the whole impact metrics and behavioral change and doing something today that will make you more successful tomorrow. So we're going to sort of roll on to the Q&A in just a moment. I see a couple of questions coming in, but I apologize again for not mentioning that earlier. So if there's anything you'd like to ask, please drop it in. We'll take a few minutes now, just rolling through some of these questions. Cool. So there's one here that says there's a lot of data points here. My team deliver reports to leadership on a weekly basis, and this would be a huge task to ask them to generate all of these reports too. How can we scale this? So I think that question may have popped in just before I was talking about the automation piece of it. That the fact that you've already got a data team caring about delivering data to the right people is great. Like that's absolutely brilliant. You're a data-driven business already. I would say that looking at tools out there that can help you automate more of that. If you've already got incredible people in the business that are capable of building and distributing these reports and identifying opportunity in the data, by getting something that can automate those insights for you, frees up that person or team's time to be gaining more insight into the data, which can have more impact in the value that they can ultimately provide to the business. This isn't a sales pitch today. Bullhorn does have a product called Bullhorn Analytics that does a lot of this stuff natively. But there are other ways you can get this insight and get it in an automated way. Yeah. Right, Joe, this is an interesting one. If you were to pick two of these metrics to start with, what would be the most important? Do we do one each?
Yeah, I think we'll do one each. I think my favourites can have to be JMI, because it cuts right past all these outer metrics and it goes right to the end of that pipeline. It's all about better work a vacancy that's already of a really high quality. You know, the customer's already shown commitment to interview, whether they're existing or new, cross-sold or not, first job you've ever worked with them or the last. So what I like about JMI is it allows you to optimize that really precious resource straight away. You know, an interviewing job is a 40% of the jobs, as we saw. So if you can maximize that by getting more candidates, and generally, you know, the creation of those interviews is much easier because, again, it's harder to convert an interviewing job than a non-interviewing job, or get a second interview than a first interview. So yeah, JMI definitely my favorite, and actually the first one I would recommend.
This isn't mine, but a thought to yours there. If as the market starts to improve and develop and jobs become more readily available again, you might sort of switch the mindset to more of a candidates with multiple interviews mindset in that process. Is that fair?
I think so.
Cool. I'm going to caveat my answer with data's not linear, right? So I don't think you can pick any one and say it's the most important because of these things, that spider web of insight, right? It's all intrinsically linked. But having worked in sales and software companies for a very long time, led sales teams, I think client churn is right up there because it is so hard to go and develop a relationship from nothing to revenue generating, to continue and follow that through to repeat business. That part of it is much easier. And I would say that's where low hanging fruit lies. And I call that metric out to my earlier context with the type of market we're in right now. It's really hard to go and find jobs. We can always encourage people out of their current job and into a new one. We can't always encourage customers to just give us a job when they're not hiring. So I would say that making sure we stick with those clients, we develop those relationships and build them out, while considering the other metrics as well. But I think that's probably the lowest hanging fruit today. So there's a question that's come in saying, does Bullhorn make gathering these metrics easy? Yeah, to my earlier point, Susan, Bullhorn Analytics products has a lot of these metrics pre-canned, not all of them. Some of them are sort of reports that you might look at just by the nature of the data you're trying to see. But if you are interested, if you're already a Bullhorn customer, which you say you are, then please talk to your account manager and they'll be able to talk to you in a bit more detail about this. But ultimately, this is what Joe and I have been living and breathing for years and years now. And you can see that we're still very passionate about it. And it's about making sure that we do a lot of the heavy lifting and thinking. We have the benefit of talking to many clients and customers out there who perhaps give us ideas, or when we talk to them, we see common themes. Joe then goes away and does some digging into the data and sees if he can model these types of insight, and if they're repeatable. And if they are, we always look to enhance and add them into the product. And this doesn't just stop now. We always continue to have that view. But yeah, talk to your account manager and they should be able to help. How do you recommend sharing data insights without overwhelming managers with too much data? It's an anonymous attendee. So hi, anonymous. I think it comes back up when I was talking about the actionable insights. I think that for me is, what do you want someone to do with the data? I appreciate, depending on where your starting point is, putting everything that we've just talked about in front of someone can be very overwhelming. But if you know as a business leader that you want that if certain actions happen, it will have an impact, a positive impact on those metrics. It's given the specific insight, actionable insight you want them to go and drive. Here's a list of all of your temps finishing assignment that you haven't spoken to or submitted to another job yet. Give them that list and tell them what it is and tell them what the expectation is and get them to do it. Because I think the training that most people in this industry have had is very much about how to do the job. So what we're doing is just trying to refocus their attention ever so slightly and perhaps their perspective on things. We're not asking them to reinvent the wheel. This is marginal gains we're asking for here. So that would be my advice there.
Just like to add on to that one, Joe, if you don't mind. I would say the thing of where is another way, a point where the distinction should be drawn between insight and actionable insight, because, you know, it could be insights that you gather over a year's worth of project or every few months. And that isn't something that you need to keep repeatedly, you know, telling managers, telling recruiters. For example, the stats that we went through today, they identify where there is opportunity, but you don't need to rerun that analysis or show a manager that every week what the latest is. Generally, more interviews on a job will result in more placements. So that's where maybe you could have a quarterly review with the managers, with the staff, and say, these are our recent findings. And this is what you will see. You will see a metric here that will show you how to maximize opportunity. We've now got an automation running that's going to automatically reach out to all of your recruiters whenever there's a finishing contractor. So I think there's an important distinction to be drawn there with what managers and recruiters actually need to see regularly, or what they can consume perhaps once a quarter or a couple of times a year.
Yeah, very good point. There's another one here that's, could you please give a concrete example of how to automate an actionable insight? Does it mean sending notifications to recruiters or anything else? There's probably multiple perspectives on this, like there's multiple layers to how you could do it. When we talk about actionable insights, it's a term we started using when we created the metrics, the example metrics that I showed earlier on that slide. So that's one way of doing it. If you have the Bullhorn Analytics platform, there's a suite of actionable insights in there that you can make available on people's OneView pages or dashboards. So that's one way of doing it if you have that platform. If you have automation, and a lot of customers do this, you can set up automations with rules behind it to trigger a notification to that person responsible for taking the action. Those, I would say, used together, like automation and analytics in this scenario used together, you'll really start to see the value is worth much more than the sum of the parts. Because a notification via automation, yeah, that's perfect, right? You want a notification. If the person doesn't take action, you've got no visibility on that. So the two sort of play hand in hand. If you don't have either of those products, there's other ways you could start by getting some list views in Bullhorn of contractors finishing their assignment. So there's some more basic things you can do there. Even if it was send a spreadsheet once a week with an update of these things, that would be a starting point if you're not doing it already. So I think it depends where you are on your data journey of what the correct answer or solid answer would be to you there. But I think starting is the baseline on this. Get it out, even if it's a crude spreadsheet. That would be my example, my recommendation. Cool, right, I think we're coming right up on time. There's one final one in here, and I think this is quite an easy answer. I see live jobs with less than 3 interviews and candidates finishing with no extension, blah, 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 etc. In OneView in analytics, where can I find the companies with previous placements? So if any of the actionable insights you saw on the screen you don't have visibility of, they might already be activated in your analytics account. Go into the metrics section in admin and search for it. If not, please raise a ticket with support or talk to your account manager, and they can be activated for you if you're on the Analytics Enterprise Edition, just to caveat that. Great. Okay, final thing for me before I let everyone go. A couple of QR codes here. This is episode 2 of 3 in the series. The next episode is simple ways to place candidates faster and generate revenue from clients. That's the right-hand side QR code if you'd like to sign up to that if you're not already. Left-hand side, if you want to contact your account manager about anything we've spoken about today, to ask any more questions, set up any demos, get any support issues helped out with, please do that on the left-hand QR code. But I'd like to thank everyone very much for their time. I know we've got a couple of minutes over here, but we very much enjoyed talking about this. Please feel free to connect with Joe Buckley and I, Joe Maguire, if you've got any other questions directly for us.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you all. Have a good day.
Bye.